All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jessie Brandt, Director of Programs and Operations for the Global Wellness Summit and Institute. Welcome to the second Blueprints of Wellbeing webinar. Please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from if you haven't already. Some quick logistics before we get started. Feel free to select speaker or gallery view, and please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. I will mute everyone shortly. Please turn on your camera if you can. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording in a follow-up email with the chat, important information, and the slide deck with everyone who has registered. Please post your questions in the chat, but keep in mind we likely can't address all of them. It is now my pleasure to introduce Terry Slavik-Suyuki, co-chair of the Wellness Communities and Real Estate Initiative. Terry, good morning. Over to you.
Thank you, Jessie, and thank everybody for being here today. We really appreciate your time. We know it's the most valuable asset we all have right now. So Amy, if you would move us to the next slide, we'll get going.
Let me just mute everyone quickly.
All right, perfect.
And then Amy, you have to unmute yourself.
Just to get us started and level set, no challenge is too great for this team.
You need to unmute yourself, Terry.
Sorry, so 85% of our health outcomes are determined by our built environment. So no challenge is too great for this group. And if that doesn't make us sit up and take note about the responsibilities we have, those of us who create places and spaces for people, I don't know what does. Next slide, please. So the question we need to ask ourselves, and you'll hear about today, is how do we create impact? Next slide. So at the Global Wellness Institute, the Wellness Communities and Real Estate Initiative, which I'm proud to be part of, has defined wellness real estate as built environments that are proactively designed to support the holistic health of those who live, work, play, learn, or ideally thrive there. If you go to the next slide, we've defined 6 different elements of wellness, and they are social, physical, mental, environmental, economic, and civic that need to be considered whenever we think about creating wellness real estate. Why the metaphor of a music mixing board, you might ask? Well, just like a great piece of music, but not every note is played to the same degree, in creating and conceiving wellness real estate, not every domain of well-being shows up to the same degree. In some cases, the opportunity may be really to lean heavily on environmental wellness or social wellness or physical wellness. But all of these domains of wellness, we believe, need to be considered really intentionally when you begin to create and activate wellness communities and real estate. And we'll show you how on the next slide. Our team defined a set of 6 guiding principles, which we give to you today, and you'll receive in the deck afterwards, as well as those listening on the recording, to think about when you start to think about creating wellness real estate. The first one is really intentional. So these communities need to be designed from the ground up, with wellness as a core lens and a core perspective of focus. That's really critical. They need to be scalable. Wellness real estate can happen in one unit. It can be one infill home in an urban setting. It can be a large-scale master plan community. It can be a resort destination or an office park. It also needs to be focused on delivering meaningful benefits that will enhance the health and wellness of the humans, of the people who will engage with the spaces that we're creating. And it should be contextual, which we mean to be adaptable and responsive to the local context. So what may work in Geneva may not work in Los Angeles, and that's important to think about. We don't rinse and repeat. We think about and learn from the context in which we're creating this real estate. And really critically, the 5th guiding principle is you need to be activated. Now, Amaya from our initiative, I know, is on the call today. She's one of the best in the world at activating wellness communities to really engage people in dynamic wellness opportunities that are human-centric, inclusive, and that shift and engage and change over time because people change over time. And then finally, we defined the last principle to be respectful. And we think about this with an ear to the past and some of the most beautiful holistic wellness practices that we can all learn from and engage with, and an eye to the future. So really thinking about how we learn from what's been done and what will come to be in the future. Next slide, please. Wellness is immeasurable. It is being measured more than ever through data and through wearable apps and all those sorts of things. But really, the bottom line is wellness is the new why. It's why people are choosing to live in one area or in one community or one type of home over another. It's the number one purchase motivator as a result of recent research that we've done. So it's really critical to lean into that. With that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Amy McDonald, who will be the moderator for today's conversation. She's a member of our Wellness Communities and Real Estate Initiative, was recently named a leading woman in wellness by the GWI, which is an illustrious honor, and I'm so proud to serve on this team with her. Amy has 35 years experience as an innovator in transformative health and wellness programming. Her expertise lies in seamlessly merging the pinnacle of resort hospitality with urban healthcare, crafting integrated models that redefine wellness paradigms. Her passion for authentic wellness experiences led her to establish Under a Tree Consulting. And for the past 19 years, Amy has spearheaded some of the world's most groundbreaking projects, collaborating with seasoned industry experts to guide clients through business definition, feasibility, and concept design and development. Her visionary approach ensures projects are not only viable and profitable, but they're also at the forefront of industry trends. Amy is a proud Canadian, as am I, with a global perspective and clients and collaborators literally around the globe, and you're in for a treat today. So Amy, over to you.
Amy, you're muted.
Hi, thank you so much,
Now we
Terry,
can
for that magnificent introduction. And most importantly, also thank you for GWI for hosting this. Thank you to all of you who are on the call. And thank you for the pleasure today of moderating a panel that is near and near to me with these two extraordinary speakers. Just sort of an overview to continue with what Terry was talking about. I love the slide where she talks about the musician, right, and being able to slide things. And so today we're going to talk a lot about the difference between sustainability and regenerative design and development and also operations. We're going to talk quite a bit about the differences in those. But I had on a conversation with Martin earlier today, early on when we talked about sustainability, right? And then we talked about regenerative, just regeneration in particular. When you think about our wellness world, we're not in the wellness world and doing what we do every day to help and support people's lives for them to sustain their lives. We are in our industry, this is globally, to actually optimize, and regenerative is the word, right? So I want us to be thinking today about systems and more holistic systems. You're going to hear a lot from Martin today, and then really specific, incredibly inspiring examples from Sarah. So I want you to be thinking about in our industry, right, that we are always trying to optimize everyone's health. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm very pleased to announce that after many years of being one of, like so many of us around the world, a huge fan of what Rancho La Puerta has done, it is an incredible honor that Sarah Olivia Brightwood is on the call today. For those of you who are at the summit, she had an incredible presentation on water and wastewater, which obviously inspired us to have her join today. I don't know that she needs much of an introduction because of just how world-renowned Rancho La Puerta is, and even more importantly, what she and others have been able to do with the foundation, which she's going to speak to. Martin Goebel has been an inspiration to me for 15 years. The work that he does behind the scenes, he's not known probably to a lot of people on the webinar today, but the work that he does with Legacy Works Group is extraordinary. And today, I think you're going to be inspired by how clearly he is able to, after all of the years of the work that they've done in regenerative development, I think you're in for a real treat. So I am going to go on with the next slide and introduce and turn it over to you, Martin. One of the things that I really wanted for you to be able to explain to us today is, can you tell us more about Legacy Works Group and what you do, what you're passionate about, and obviously the impact that you're having? And you're probably muted.
How's that?
That's much better.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. It's a real treat to be back with you. I was with you, many of you, in May when Richard Gere and I both spoke at your Global Wellness Real Estate meeting in New York. By the way, I was with him last week in Madrid, and he sends his best. He and his wife were getting an award for some of the work they do in Mexico, and which I'll talk about in a little while. Legacy Works Group is the organization I belong to. We basically work to catalyze and enable, facilitate, and empower local communities and businesses to achieve what is more than sustainability, but regeneration, because we believe so strongly that that the world needs it, and we need to go way beyond sustainability. We have a practice, both a nonprofit practice, where we proactively work with communities and businesses, and we also have a consulting earned income practice that we pursue to try to help businesses get on the road or the journey of regeneration. So we do a little bit of both, for and nonprofit work.
So, Martin, I have a big question, which I've already hinted at. I would love for you to speak to how things have evolved from sustainability to what we're seeing now as this new word of regeneration.
Sure. Well, this is a very busy image here, but we've been perfecting it over time. I think the most important thing to say is that everything in life is a continuum. We learn with every day that we practice what we do. And what we're learning nowadays is that conventional development is just not cutting it anymore, basically because the limits to resources, human capacities, and so on we're bumping up against them quite a bit, more and more every day. Even sustainability is no longer enough. Without pursuing a sort of a regenerative approach, that is making things better than what we found them, is much better for business. It's a lot better for borrowing money and attracting investors. It creates a lot more resilience, and of course, it eliminates or at least reduces risks enormously. And if you pursue that path, you're also finding that there's way more, and with every passing day, more and more capital going in that direction. So that's what we do, and that's what we're trying to pursue with businesses and communities, especially in Mexico.
That said, though, a lot of what we're talking about today, even though obviously Rancho La Puerta and a lot of the work that you do, Martin, is in Mexico, I think it's important for the audience to know that we purposely are sharing ideas and obviously experiences, but a lot of them are obviously very applicable to many locations all over the world.
That's correct. Yeah.
I'd like for you to talk about blind spots and bright spots. I just love that. And I know that there are some here that are very important for you to discuss today. So can I ask you to expand?
Well, I was delighted to hear from Terry that you're all going to get a copy of this presentation and this webinar. So I'm not going to go into every single one of these points, but I think basically what I want to do is highlight that if you do things the way things have been conventionally done in the past, you're likely going to run into some real problems and what I call blind spots, wherein you really overlook opportunities that you maybe wouldn't have found before. Nowadays, and I'll point this out in just a minute, there's a lot of stakeholder resistance by both local communities and communities of interest against large-scale developments, especially large-scale developments, and communities that you are all engaged in. Unless you engage them early and often and really understand the context of place, you're going to run into some real issues. Costs can be avoided by doing it right from the beginning and really thinking holistically and in generic systems wide, as both Amy and Terry mentioned. And I think most importantly for you who are trying to sell something that we are increasingly understanding as wellness, both local, personal wellness, family wellness, business wellness, we really need to understand this as a context of regional wellness, wherever you're located. And by pursuing this, you really create a much more robust story for your developments and your operations than you would otherwise. So I hope you get a chance to study this short image in the future. And there's, of course, a lot more to add to this. And I'm sure you yourselves have run into some of these issues yourselves already. So I'll just stop right there.
Thank you, Martin. I was fascinated on one of our conversations when we were working through some of the content for today. You talked a lot about, obviously, as we all probably are aware on this call, is about risk aversion. And so I wanted to just ask you to speak to how development has gone from, like, the opportunity to go, and again, it's another continuum, right? But to go from colonialism to something that's much more independent and self-empowering. And so I am going to ask you to go and talk a little bit more about this fabulous slide.
Again, as I said earlier, Amy, we don't like to think of ourselves as colonialists anymore, but oftentimes with good intentions, we buy a piece of land or a building or something where we want to do a development. And oftentimes our sort of posture is a bit of a colonialistic, or at least a transactional kind of relationship, especially with local communities that we want to engage and who we want to be part of our development, because we depend on them for everything that we consume in the location and in the operation. So I think I want to point out here that if we could move to the right of this continuum and really think of ourselves as collaborating with local communities and local businesses, trying to find ways to really, consume their products rather than bring them in from abroad, and do a number of different things that can really build a sort of synergistic relationship with local communities, it's always much better. I find it amazing that still today, many developers in Mexico come in and just plop themselves down and unfortunately displace local communities. So I just want to, I threw this slide in because I wanted people to understand that by adopting a different posture and really helping local communities become self-empowered and independent, it's always a much better relationship in the long run than it would be otherwise if you approached it from a more transactional or colonialistic type approach. So I hope and I encourage all of you to think about this.
So, Martin, I think it's important for us to talk about lessons learned, and if you could walk us through some examples, that would be super. I would appreciate it.
Okay, as you all know, I work mostly in Mexico personally for Legacy Works Group, and there are many developments in Mexico. In fact, I would say most developments in Mexico, at least along the Pacific coast, are very poorly sited. This is an extreme case in Baja, on Baja's East Cape, where there's a development called Costa Palmas, where the Four Seasons and an Aman resort are both built right at the mouth of a major arroyo. An arroyo in Mexico and in the desert southwest of the United States is a dry riverbed that during hurricane season completely becomes a torrent and puts huge risk on the development itself. This particular development has had to spend millions of dollars reconstructing the beaches, stopping erosion, and even moving water to the north to try to get it to not affect the development they've developed. So just to the left of that jet air engine is where both of these resorts are located. In addition to that, these developments hire huge numbers of people to come and work. They eventually settle in these places. There's a multiplier effect. For every room built, there's somewhere between 12 and 16 people that move into the local community. Generally speaking, neither the development nor the government do nearly enough to try to accommodate for these new families and new workers that come in. That creates social issues that the government, generally speaking, does not deal with very well. So I think it's incumbent on developers and operators to think about these things way in advance so they can plan for them and deal with them in advance. The second not so good example is just south of this place. just north of Cabo Pulmo National Park. It's a new development or a proposed new development called Baja Bay Club. It's in a very sensitive area full of endemic and endangered species, and of course, right next to a national park. This particular developer has not done very much to really take care of the potential impacts to the park itself and to the resources it already has removed, as you can see from the upper right picture there, without any permits whatsoever. And so, unfortunately, very bad press has caused this whole place to be shut down temporarily, at least. We don't know if permanently, but temporarily, causing major costs and legal issues for this developer. So again, word of warning, do it right from the beginning, consider local communities and so local natural resources from the beginning, and things will go much more smoothly on the back end. Then we have a couple of good examples. I work very closely with, as you all know, from having been in New York in May with Richard Gere and a bunch of other investors and developers in a place called Xala, which is part of the Costa Alegre of the Jalisco coast of Mexico. Here, the buyers of the land and the developers realized very early on that they needed to work with the local community first. Established two foundations, not one, but two foundations focused on working with the local community on empowering women, local businesses, and so on and so forth, solving some of their environmental problems first, and then planning the development after that, once a good relationship developed with the local community. Now, Sierra Amar Costa Alegre, which is the second foundation, is looking at preserving, conserving, and restoring the entire 100-kilometer coast of that whole Costa Alegre region, something they don't have to do. They're not required to do it, but they're doing it basically because they understand that regional health, regional wellness is incumbent on local wellness. And now they've signed an agreement with Six Senses to be the first hotel on the Xala property. So that all speaks to thinking of things way in advance, understanding the local place, and really digging in on doing the right thing from the very beginning. And then finally, a second good example is Playa Viva in Guerrero State, Mexico. This is a state that is often on everybody's watch list as being unsafe. However, Playa Viva started working with the local community, the local schools, the local watershed, and understanding how important a development can be for a local community from the get-go. And it is one of the best examples of regenerative development in the world right now, and has received literally hundreds of, not hundreds, but dozens of awards for what they've done so far. It's a 15-year-old development with only 19 rooms, but has having a huge impact in the local community, and therefore is beloved by local people and local and all its guests. The guests are actually very proud of coming to this place over and over again because of what they're doing to really regenerate the entire social and environmental fabric of this place.
Thank you, Martin.
Sure.
I just a lot of what has happened with Playa Viva is interesting, and I'm excited that Sarah is going to go into a lot of the things that you just talked about that that are so special about Playa Viva. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
I think would be helpful for you to, again, I love this slide because it's circular, it's not linear like we talked about earlier. But can you explain a little bit about the process and the building
Sure.
process and the impact?
Sure. From all those examples I just spoke about, the key to all of this is to finding local leaders, in local communities to build trust with. Coming from the outside, there's always a lot of skepticism about outsiders, especially in small rural coastal places or any places for that matter, because of the colonialistic approach that we talked about earlier. So building trust takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a team. But if you do it and if you cultivate it, everything starts to fall together. So you cultivate collaboration, you begin to work on local community projects, and then you start designing your development with the local community rather than despite the local community. And you keep going around this circle And these are just some of the basic building blocks of pursuing sustainable or regenerative development, and especially regenerative development. So this is the process that Playa Viva is undergoing. This is the process that Shala and the Costa Alegre are going through. And they're really taking this to heart, and it's working. That's the most important thing, is it's working very, very well.
And it's, I mean, I know that Sarah really resonated with this slide as well for Rancho La Puerta. And I
Yeah.
apologize for the mark on the slide. Someone that obviously is on our call put the marks there, and I'm not able to get rid of them. So I want to just apologize. And if the person could delete them, that would be wonderful. So
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I would like for you for your final words of what's
Yeah.
very important to leave for the listeners today.
Good. Well, thank you very much for listening to all this. So on both sides of this slide, you have building blocks, what we think are very important building blocks. And then, of course, a kind of a recap of the process that I just described. Better building, meaning better siting of projects, better building materials, better design, and better operations that are all regenerative is terribly important, more and more with each day, especially as water, biodiversity, and energy are becoming bigger and bigger issues. If you study the place, you would find out that local communities have great pride in their place. If you can help enhance that pride and adopt that pride, it goes a long way to building long-term relationships with the local community, protecting local natural resources, whether it's fish, coral reefs, turtle nesting sites, watersheds, and all that is terribly important, because it really reduces your risk in the long run for the kinds of things you need as inputs for your own operations, meaning water and energy and all those things. Also, it's important to understand that the markets themselves are changing. This is one thing that I think you highlighted at the New York conference, is how preferences are changing among travelers, especially wellness-oriented travelers.
Yeah.
There's more and more demand, and therefore more and more need to develop these kinds of places with great conscientiousness with local communities. And finally, capital is starting to move in this direction, whether it's foundation capital, impact capital, or even conventional capital is starting to move in the direction of more responsible, more regenerative development. So I'll just end right there and encourage you all to get in contact with us if you wish, and we would love to go more deeply into each of these elements anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, so much. So with great honor, and I know many of us around the world that are, deeply connected to wellness, Rancho La Puerta is very beloved. And I thought I knew a lot about it, but it's been interesting and quite inspiring to talk to Sarah, not only about Rancho La Puerta, but really what it has been able to do. And I think it came up quite a bit with Martin as well, when he talked about Chala and Playa Viva, that, there is the property and the brand, but then there's the foundation. And so I'm excited, obviously, that Sarah's going to talk quite a bit about examples. And obviously, we all know how many awards it's won. And after 84 years, there's a lot to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And one of my very first questions is really to talk about the foundation, Fundación La Puerta. So Sarah, I'm turning it over to you. Tell us about it.
Thank you, Amy, and the Global Wellness Institute. And I'm so glad that this conversation is happening. So Fundación La Puerta is a Mexican nonprofit. For 45 years, Rancho La Puerta has donated 10 to 15% of its EBITDA to Fundación. And with this investment, we've helped our city to be designated a Pueblo Mágico. We have made a world of difference in our community. Fundación supports our entire social ecosystem. And I hope that with the examples I'll share, you'll come to see how the bright spots and the collaborationalism, which is a word that I'd never quite heard in that way before, is embodied by the work we do.
Martin's word.
I made it up.
It's a good word. From environmental education to youth leadership to eco-entrepreneurs to the most beautiful park in the region to land conservation and river restoration, Fundación La Puerta and our programs have been agents of change in Tecate. Tecate is a border town just south of San Diego, a town that has grown to be 120,000 people. It's the way in which Rancho La Puerta gives back to our community, the community where our 500 employees live. When you're rooted in the same place for 84 years, you become family, and we call our employees the Ranch family. Altruism runs deep in this family. My mother began the first hot breakfast program in Tecate in the early 1940s. She started the first special needs school in a trailer at the ranch in the early 1950s. Tecate was just a little village then, but over time the needs of the community grew as Tecate industrialized. An incentivized tax-free zone was created in the 1980s, and the city doubled, then tripled, then quadrupled in size with no money for infrastructure. We created Fundación La Puerta to provide more support for the city. We honor the culture and traditions that give meaning and identity to our region. We provide transformational tools to our community using a lot of the processes that Martin highlighted, building trust being a huge part of it.
Sarah, can you talk about, and this, because this came up quite a bit when you and I were talking, about feeding that which feeds us?
Yes, this is one of our guiding principles. Aini is a Quechua word from the indigenous people of the Andes. It means reciprocity, feeding that which feeds us. This principle is so important, and without it, we couldn't have built the partnerships and the relationships that keep Rancho La Puerta in that place of the #1 spa continuously. We acknowledge our interdependence and connection, not only the human, but also the non-human world, the web of life that sustains us. Our own bodies are a microcosm of this principle of reciprocity. An enormous part of our bodies is made up of bacteria and mitochondria. These are other living beings. They digest our food and they give us energy. We are a collective. In indigenous cultures, reciprocity kept wealth balanced and moving through the community. It kept ecosystems intact and gave deep meaning to people's lives. Isolation and loneliness, extreme poverty and extreme wealth are a symptom of a lack of Aini. On a practical level, regenerative systems cannot exist if you're isolated from your human and your natural community. There are too many real estate projects out there that are not rooted in place or rooted in community, as Martin showed us. When the connection exists and it's authentic, magic happens. We experience synergy, our efforts are met with reciprocity, and our lives have meaning. Now I'll speak to the impact. All these things we've accomplished through collaboration, education, and direct engagement with the community. With that investment of EBITDA over the past 30 years, we have transformed the city of Tecate. We have 45 years of shared purpose with our local community. And all 37 schools in the city of Tecate have the support of our environmental education curriculums. We preserved 7 miles of urban river through the heart of the town. I'll be speaking more about that later. You can go on to the next slide.
So my question to you, because this is a very important story, and I know we talked about it with Martin, is to share about the importance of fire souls. Can you tell us that, what it is, and the short and the long-term impact?
A fire soul is someone who catches fire with an idea, someone whose sparks ignite their community, somebody whose passion burns bright. I know we have all met people like that in our lives. When you're working with community members, it helps to find and support those fire souls. The Comité de Mujeres La Lluvia del Sur, which means the Women's Committee of the Rain from the South, a group of new immigrants to the area. They lived in a shanty town on the outskirts of the city in a neighborhood called La Colosio. They came to us for help. The settlement was along a part of the river that was a convenient place for everyone to dump construction debris, mattresses, appliances, dead dogs, and just about everything you can imagine. This group of women had a dream to create a playground for their children and to plant trees. We have a very dynamic youth volunteer program, and our 70 volunteers, joined by several hundred members of their community, cleaned the river. We removed more than 70 tons of trash. We built the playground together, and then we brought training in biointensive organic gardening so they could feed their families. In that first slide, you saw the land cleared, but everything sterile, everything, no life except for this small patch of garden. So now if you go to the next slide, you will see the site today. And here is Doña Carmen. When I first met her 22 years ago, she was illiterate. When we began to clean the river together, one of our volunteers taught literacy classes to the women of La Colosio. Now she sends me emails on a computer we donated to the community. She continues the river cleanups in her neighborhood of La Colosio, and she has a radio show on how to garden. She sits on citizens committees with municipal officials. She plants gardens in the city schools. Doña Carmen is a fire soul.
So I want to make sure that we're talking about the river and wastewater. So I'm going to ask you to share more because obviously, right, there's been a lot of work. We've seen these photos. Can you speak to how that process has continued to evolve?
When my parents came here in 1940, our first guests swam in the river. There was no running water. And our wells provided delicious drinking water. But in my life, I've seen all that change. The city industrialized and the river corridor that was a convenient place to dump trash just got worse and worse. In 1999, the State Department of Public Works was going to channel the river in cement. And we mounted a citywide campaign for the preservation of the Tecate River, not the decimation of the Tecate River. We established community gardens like the one at La Colosio and provided urban planning for a green corridor along the river. This river corridor is now home to Tecate's museums and performing arts center. We've sparked partnerships and woven networks with many other organizations to preserve and protect the river and our aquifer. We live in this binational watershed, and water knows no boundaries. Our sewage flows out to the sea on the other side of the border in San Diego. Over 50% of Tecate's sewage is discharged directly into the river. The contamination is even worse in Tijuana, which is the second largest city in Mexico. It's a serious problem. Rancho La Puerta is downstream from Tecate. Our aquifer is depleted and contaminated. Potable water comes from the Colorado River, very far away, and is the most expensive in Mexico. And it's an increasingly unreliable source as it's been overallocated and severely depleted. We had to find a way to create a miracle, to turn sewage into high-quality irrigation water, to keep the extensive gardens at Rancho La Puerta, to irrigate the new gardens at the residences at Rancho La Puerta, our residential wellness community. Every development requires potable water and irrigation water. How that water is sourced and how wastewater is treated is a big decision in every development. The system that we chose costs about the same to install as a conventional aerobic plant, but is only a fraction of the cost to operate and maintain, and there is no need for the substantial cost of waste disposal. So we found a system that works through biology, It is passive, net zero energy use, and no waste. The only waste products are compost and energy. Through anaerobic biodigestion, wetlands, and ozone, we're able to treat we are treating 48 gallons per minute of domestic wastewater in this small pilot treatment plant that has now been operating for a year and a half, and it has met all of its standards for California Title 22, which is irrigation water with human contact. It's tertiary treatment with disinfection. And we are now building a plant that's 10 times larger that takes sewage that is currently going into the Tecate River, 460 gallons per minute of sewage, and transforming it to clean, high-quality irrigation water that will maintain our extensive gardens. We'll also be able to return high-quality water to the river. The next slide. Fundación has been improving water quality in the river for many years through regular cleanups and through wetlands. This work was done in 2008 with a grant from the EPA and the North American Development Bank. And it's an example of our work to bring life back, to restore the ecosystem and diversity benefits of the river. So we are no longer having to lead the work along the river. State and city officials and the local community are committed to creating protections. So this year, a master planning process involving all levels of government and community is establishing ordinances that will govern development along the river. This master plan has many benefits to the community: climate regulation, improving the quality of urban life, countless wellness, contribution to the community, the economy, and tourism. And on the top, you see a children's playground, and that is the plan for the new, much improved children's playground at La Colosio, where Doña Carmen lives.
So I want you to share, when I asked you the question about what you are most proud of, and there's many things, you actually talked about this. And so will you walk us through the park?
So it's really hard to say what I'm most proud of, but as my training in landscape architecture, I would say the beauty of the park we created and maintained for the city of Tecate, that's home to all of our programs. In a city of 120,000, we have over 100,000 users of the park every year. If you could go to the next slide. So we have been honored with an award this year from the National Parks and Recreation Association in Mexico for excellence in landscape design and architecture, highlighting projects that enhance public spaces in innovative and sustainable ways, promoting biodiversity and community well-being. I hope that hits a lot of Martin's bright spots. This is our Environmental Education Center, and it's one of the jewels at the park. We work with all the city schools and provide environmental education to children at all grade levels. Last year, 4,000 elementary and preschool children attended our workshops. We also do gardening workshops for children and on weekends for families, and we certify urban gardeners. They're all learning that we live in an interdependent world that we must care for and share with others. Our youth volunteer and leadership program empowers our youth through engagement in community service, ecosystem restoration, investing in the health of the river, in the way we communicate, and in the dreams that we nurture. Next slide. These young people grow into positions of responsibility and have an awareness of the power of teamwork, of collaborationalism. Apart from the educational programs, the park also provides hiking trails, yoga, meditation, singing groups, community events like graduation ceremonies. It's a safe place for families to explore, picnic, and watch soccer games. What everybody looks forward to are festivals, which bring learning, connection, and joy to the lives of the families in Tecate. Welcoming Spring, World Environment Day, and Day of the Dead were attended by nearly 20,000 people this year. These events are zero waste as we continue to teach families how to gather and celebrate without generating trash. We've just celebrated our 24th Day of the Dead festival. I wish you could have all been there. In 2000, we realized that Halloween was overtaking the Mexican traditions along the border. And Day of the Dead is a remarkable pre-Columbian tradition where stories are passed on, the ancestors are honored. And during this celebration, the spirits of the dead are enticed to visit their loved ones through beautiful altars, music, and food. Now our festival involves the whole town over a 2-week period, and it draws people from all over the state.
I think it's important, and I just want to insert that when we think about this particular type of system and being regenerative, I was fascinated to think that here was a ritual, right? Here's something that's a big part of a culture that was starting to also, obviously die. And so this renewal of something that now is actually in the US as well for people that are Hispanic is really, we've been able to bring that back. So Sarah, we are getting to the time where we need to make sure that our everyone that's participating can ask questions. So I would like to ask you if you could share, so that I'm not going through the slides, I'd love for you to share the things that are the most important takeaways. What I heard from today, certainly from you and Martin, is a foundation, having a foundation. I think the importance of natural resources, but in particular, and obviously what is so critical and relevant to everyone on the call, no matter where you are in the world, is water, obviously in the wastewater component, and community, of course. And I think maybe the bottom line is this reciprocity. And so is there anything that I've missed that you want?
Very briefly to summarize, I would say that the wealth we share is returned 1,000-fold. And in relation to employee loyalty and minimal staff turnover and community support when it really matters. And I'm just going to close with one brief story, one image. In 2007, the ranch was on fire. Half of the ranch burned down. It was part of a huge conflagration all through Southern California and this area. And on the highway, every single water truck in the region was lining up to help us. People in pickup trucks with picks and shovels were showing up. They blocked the freeway. So many people were coming to help when they heard that the ranch was burning. That depth of love and appreciation and recognition of what we've given back to the support to support the community. Those are intangible things that you cannot value. So I will close there, but that's how we've been able to retain that #1 destination resort and spa for so many years. That pride and loyalty from our staff.
And have inspired so many of us all over the world, really. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And Amy, we have one question from the chat, if we could.
Yes.
There was one question for Martin back in the beginning, and Martin, that is, why Mexico for your really, life-changing work? Why Mexico?
Well, thanks for asking. I'm from Mexico originally. I was born and raised here of foreign parents. So I have a very strong affinity to this country and my country. I'm also American, so I go back and forth. Legacy Works Group works all over, especially the western part of the United States. But I brought this whole portfolio of Mexican projects into the mix. And so I'm very proud to be part of Legacy Works Group and working in Mexico, although I've gone back and forth.
That's great. That's a great answer. And I have a couple of observations, if I may, Amy, that I heard from both of the presenters.
Absolutely.
So Martin, I loved how you spoke so much about an integrated systems approach, right? And one of the things you said was we start with better building and better siting. Yep. And I think that's really important for everyone on this call to think about that, things like roads, are they built and designed for cars or for people, right? wastewater and how water flows. Is that designed naturally, like what Rancho La Puerta has done and what Sarah so eloquently shared, or is it fabricated after the fact? Those are two really big things. So I think if we start with that, as opposed to starting with what's the product we're building, we have a
Yes.
better chance at working with our natural systems and truly improving them, not only for the planet, but for the people who occupy the planet. And from Sarah,
Exactly.
Sarah, I mean, the chat is on fire, pun intended, with really, you know, gratitude for your metaphor around fire souls, right? And I think we can agree that everyone on this call this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you're calling in from, really, we are fire souls, right? So how can we ignite the communities in which we work to think about regenerative wellness in a much more intentional and meaningful way? And then I think the other takeaway I heard from Sarah, and I hope any of the other sort of landscape architects on this meeting today from anywhere around the world heard about the wastewater treatment plant that Rancho La Puerta has done, and will lean into looking at that and studying that as an opportunity to improve how you design and create communities wherever in the world you are. Those are my two takeaways, Amy.
And Terry, I didn't say that the wastewater treatment plant is also a beautiful place to be. There's no smell, there's no noise. It's a phenomenal environment.
Well, and Sarah, it's not a giant, you know, paint roller of concrete put on the earth with flumes and unnatural systems. It's beautiful. It's an amenity for the community, the people who live there, and the greater community around. Beautiful. Well done.
Terry,
Thank
I would love for you, since you are speaking, do you want to share, because I know we're pretty excited about our next, do you want to just talk a little bit about this?
Sure, I'll touch on this quickly, but I'm going to invite Nancy to fill in the gaps I miss. This is the 4th annual coming up in June at JP Morgan Chase's headquarters in New York City and Manhattan. It's a well building. It's beautiful, beautiful space. It will be our 4th annual Wellness Real Estate Community Symposium, hosted by the Global Wellness Summit. It is amazing. If anyone on this call knows Nancy Davis, and I know many of you, most of you do, she is the one woman in the world who has the uncanny ability to pack 50 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound bag. I can guarantee you that. Now, first of all, I'm inviting you all to scan the QR code and join us at this event. I know there is a early bird pricing opportunity in effect now through, I think, part of January. I promise you, this is a day that will change your world. It's a day where you will learn and hear from true makers of wellness real estate. You will hear about new technologies. You'll hear about a systems approach to thinking. You'll hear about case studies. You'll hear data and metrics, what worked, what didn't. How can we learn from that to improve what we bring to the world every day? What did I miss, Nancy?
I don't think you missed a thing. Except I'm not sure about the potatoes exactly, but it was fantastic. I think just it's going to be an amazing event. Terry and Amy and Sarah, they're all going to be there. They're in Martin. I hope you will be back. It's really, I will say that it's extremely global.
Yes.
You know, the agenda that we put together really does represent the DNA of both organizations, the Summit and the Institute, and we really do try to look at the whole world and what is going on in this incredibly robust, booming sector. So I urge you to join us.
I just want to go back because this slide was up, just in thinking about, I've now been attending 2 different things. The Wellness Symposium, obviously through the Global Wellness Institute, inspired me enough that I wanted to join Terry and JF, who are our chairs. The other environmental and regenerative conference that I've gone to, and I've only gone once, is in Mexico, and that's part of my, my contributions, I guess, with Martin. And so I just wanted to also say that if people are interested, that this is something, obviously, that you could also join. It's global, but it is global and similar in some ways to the GWI event, but it is smaller. It's probably only about 200 people, but I think it's important as a community that we're growing and building, and just wanted to just make a mention that I think both events are really important to attend.
Great. And Amy, we have a late breaking question. If I may, this one's for Sarah from the chat. It's from Fawn. And Fawn asks, thank you. And first of all, she says, when you mentioned the need to have a foundation, can you elaborate on that? Is it an organization and or understanding of the principles of regenerative design? Can you expand upon what you mean by a foundation?
Okay, so for us in Mexico, Fundación is basically what in the US would be called a 501c3. It's a nonprofit that can receive donations that are then tax deductible to the donors. That made sense from a business perspective for us as Rancho La Puerta to create an entity that we could then donate to, and that entity would be doing the work in the community rather than our doing the work directly. So that's how Fundación La Puerta came about. I think, there are many different shapes to how philanthropy can happen in an area, but that's what worked for us within the legal financial context.
And that's another great example of really an ecosystem approach, right? And blurring the edges of your community to involve the greater community around, which is, again, more regenerative and improves the quality of life for those who are involved in that as well.
And we certainly heard more of that with Martin also.
Yeah.
Right.
That their foundations are so important. Yep.
Right.
Any more fire-breaking questions, Terry?
No, not at this time. And I think I would just say that this is the second of what we hope to be a series of webinars featuring the makers of wellness real estate. We have 4 more planned to engage, entertain you before we hope to all see you in New York City in June.
I would just ask if Susie Ellis, the fire soul among us, would like to say something about all of this.
Well, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Terry and Amy and Sarah and Martin. It's great to see you again. What I love about this, and that's why I would encourage you to also come to the symposium, is that not only do you learn things, but you make connections with people. And I find that everyone in this arena is willing to help each other. I mean, Sarah has, learned a lot, and Terry has learned a lot. And we all believe that by making all of the wellness real estate communities and properties and buildings better, it strengthens the whole ecosystem. So, it's like getting a lot of consultants on board, whatever you're doing. So it's great to connect.
That's collaborationalism, right, Martin?
I hope so. Yes, I think so. Yeah.
I love that term.
Yeah, we'll always give you credit, Martin.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately, it's about time, but if you can all unmute yourself, and kudos to everyone involved. Thank you for
thank you,
this
everybody.
active chat, and thank you if you can give a hand for Terry, Amy, Sarah, and Martin. Thank you for joining us. We will send you a follow-up email with the recording, with the chat, with the slide deck, and thank you for joining us. We will announce the date for the 3rd webinar in this series shortly. It's I think supposed to be in January, so stay tuned on that. And I wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Jesse.
Gracias.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hasta luego.